Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Jessica Martinez sat at the edge of the long steel conference table, her notebook open, pen still in hand. Even though the discussion had long since moved on without her, she wasn't invisible. She was just being treated like she was. Around her, the room buzzed with confident voices and fast banter, a club of familiarity, experience, and assumption. The kind of room where people already knew who was worth listening to. And Jessica? She was just a face they hadn't bothered to learn. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Colonel Marcus Steele stood at the front, flipping through briefing slides that displayed today's exercises. 1,500-meter evaluations begin at 0800. Fail, and you're done, period. Heads nodded. Some grinned. The type of grin that assumes you've already won. Jessica didn't grin. She knew better. She knew because she'd spent her entire life in rooms like this. From the dusty rifle ranges of Catalonia to the labs at MIT to the obstacle courses of basic training, she had lived in the spaces between assumptions. A Spanish accent? Must be. A foreign exchange student? A quiet demeanor? Must be unsure. Small frame? Must lack endurance. Woman with a sniper rifle? Must be lost. But what they never saw was the fire. It burned behind her calm eyes and moved in the measured rhythm of her breathing. It pulsed through her fingers each time she cleaned her M24 and lived in the geometry of her mind every time. She calculated wind deflection in her head before sleep. The fire came from her grandfather, an old Spanish infantryman who taught her that silence wasn't submission. It was preparation. And today, that fire would be tested at exactly 0745. Colonel Steele stepped into the prep bay like a judge entering a courtroom. His presence carried weight. 28 years in uniform, 3 combat tours, a reputation as the finest long-range instructor in the country, and a belief, unspoken but deeply felt, that talent had a certain look, a certain sound, and a certain background. Jessica had none of it. She sat quietly at her station, rechecking her scope alignment, cleaning her bolt assembly for the second time, not because it needed cleaning, but because it was her ritual, her way of grounding herself before a test. She didn't look up when Steele's boots stopped behind her. She didn't have to, Martinez. He said, loud enough for others to hear, "I need a word." She stood with precise movements, rifle still in hand, spine straight. "Yes, sir." He looked her over like an equation that didn't balance. "I reviewed your file." Of course. He had top of your class in marksmanship, engineering degree from MIT, Spanish Army family, right? She nodded. But no combat record, no confirmed deployments, no field time. "No, sir. Not yet. Yet." He folded his arms. "You understand this program has a 93% failure rate. And those who fail usually waste instructor time. You. Sure you're in the right place?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Jessica didn't flinch. "I didn't come to waste time, sir. I came to meet the standard." "Meeting it won't be enough," he replied, voice flat. "Exceed it or go home." She didn't argue. She just returned to her bench and resumed cleaning her rifle. But there was something she hadn't told him. Not about her weekend volunteering at the Veterans Hospital. Not about the 2,000-meter shots she'd practiced in the mountains of New Mexico last year. Not about the breathwork drills she'd learned from freedivers to lower her heart rate to 42 BPM. No, what she hadn't told him, what no one here knew, was that she could see the target long before anyone else could. Not with her eyes, with her mind. She could feel the math, the angle of the sun, the whisper of wind, the invisible variables that live between the bullet and its destination. And today, for the first time, she would let it all speak. The shooting. Range opened like a scar through the Virginia pines. A 3-mile strip of engineered wilderness, dotted with sensors and lined with watchtowers. At the 500-meter mark, the targets looked generous. At 1,000 meters, they became demanding. At 1,500, They became myth. That's where Steele held his record. As the candidates lined up for Phase 1, the tension rose like heat from the gravel. Jessica noted how the others stood, confident, chatting, checking gear like they were rehearsing for a photo op. She didn't talk. She didn't need to. Her world narrowed to breath and glass, her eye to the scope, her mind to the calculation. 500 meters, exhale, pause, squeeze, bullseye. 750 meters, adjust for wind. Let the breeze pass, exhale, bullseye. 1,000 meters, sun's moved, adjust by 2 mils. Slow the breath, let the world fade, bullseye. The instructors murmured. The other candidates started to glance sideways. And Steele? He watched in stony silence. Martinez, he said during the midday break. You using your own ammo? No, sir. He tapped her rifle with his pen, then explained the grouping. You're 6 inches tight. Better than military spec. I practiced, she said simply. It wasn't arrogance. It was truth. Every evening, every weekend, every spare moment while others drank or slept or talked about themselves. She practiced. But Steele wasn't convinced. Not yet. He watched her like a mechanic watches a car he didn't build, waiting for it to break so he could say, told. You so. And that's when the radio crackled. Command to all instructors. Hold position. Potential threat developing. All exercises paused. People froze. Steele turned. A murmur passed through the group. Jessica didn't move. Not out of shock, but because something in her gut had shifted. A cold pull, like the world had just narrowed and gravity had grown thicker. The next voice was higher, urgent. Sniper. Threat identified. Potential location, rooftop 22 miles from the capital. Intel confirms high-powered rifle. Possible government target. Jessica blinked. 22 miles. Longer than any shot in active U.S. operational history. Longer than she'd ever attempted under pressure. Then, all precision qualified personnel report to command. She stood before the message had finished. Colonel Steele turned toward the group, then looked at her. For the first time, he didn't look skeptical. He looked scared. Martinez, he said, voice low, with me. And just like that, the test changed. It was no longer about distance. It was about everything she had ever prepared for colliding with a moment no one believed she could own. But she was ready, because sometimes the people no one notices are the ones most prepared when everything falls apart. How do you steady your breath when the whole nation holds it with you? Jessica sat in the back of the Black Hawk, the rotors slicing the sky with mechanical violence. The cityscape of Washington, D.C. unfolded below in slow motion. Rooftops, monuments, streets choked with sirens. It looked like any other bustling morning. But from 2 miles away, someone had sighted down a rifle, aiming not just at buildings, but at democracy itself. And she was the only one who might stop it. Inside the chopper, the air was thick with tension. Men in tactical gear checked rifles, relayed coordinates, whispered acronyms. But Jessica didn't speak. She ran the calculation again and again and again. Distance, 22 miles wide, 6 miles per hour cross, shifting humidity, rising elevation, 211 feet above sea level. Compensation, 121 feet impact window. Less than 3 seconds. Her eyes closed briefly. Not in fear, in focus, because while the others looked for the threat, she was becoming the solution. Martinez. Steele's voice cut through the drone of the engine. He sat across from her now, no longer the swaggering instructor but a man, facing his own limits. You ever taken a shot like this before? She opened her eyes. No, sir. You ever missed when it mattered? Pause. I haven't been given the chance, sir. He looked away. That was the thing about doubting someone. You rarely imagined the day would come when you'd need them to save your life. As the helicopter banked left toward the staging site, Jessica caught her reflection in the reinforced glass. Tired eyes, calm breath. Every inch of her held together by discipline, training, and something more ancient, resolve. The landing zone was quiet. No crowds, no cameras. Just the distant rumble of a city on edge and a rooftop where death waited with a scope. Jessica moved like she was stepping into gravity 10 times heavier than normal, because that's what it felt like when your shot could either end a crisis or define one. The rooftop had been cleared and fortified. A spotter team was already unpacking optics and calibrating wind gauges, but they weren't here to shoot. They were here to support whoever dared, and for the first time in U.S. history, that someone was a 5 feet 4 inches woman from Barcelona with no combat record, no reputation, and no margin for error. Her modified M24 was already waiting, rebuilt mid-flight with a custom barrel, aerodynamic scope, and hand-loaded ammo precise to the 1,000th grain. Around it lay a field of open gear cases and cables, but Jessica didn't need clutter. She needed clarity. She lay prone at the edge of the rooftop, 2-point support, elbows flat, cheek against stock. The rifle became her body, the scope her eye, the wind her second language. Through the lens, she saw it, a figure, mid-30s, tactical posture, the slow, methodical body movements of someone trained. He was scanning federal buildings, sweeping with care. He wasn't guessing. He was waiting. Jessica exhaled. This is Martinez. Target identified. Suspected shooter on northeast roofline. Level 7. Northwest quadrant of scaffolding. Range confirmed at 22 miles. I have visual. The headset crackled with acknowledgments, but they felt far away, because now it was just her. And the shot. The next voice was General Hawkins. Cool, resolute. You are clear to engage upon confirmation of clean line and backstop. Repeat. Rules of engagement are active. Discretion is yours. No pressure. Jessica studied the wind flags, checked the mirage lines, measured her breathing. She waited. Not for orders. For the moment when all the variables aligned, she wasn't a gambler. She was a scientist of violence, a technician of calm. The target shifted, moved behind cover, waited. Jessica's spotter murmured beside her, might be trying to pick a better angle, or waiting for movement inside the Capitol. She didn't respond. She was counting again. Heartbeats, distance, variance, and then he moved to the edge of the scaffolding, adjusted his scope, planted his feet, lowered into position. She saw it in his movement. Intent. This was it. Her trigger finger settled. Her lungs paused between beats. The universe narrowed to a single silent line between justice and disaster. Then the squeeze. The rifle kicked gently. Like a whisper of thunder, the round traveled for over 4 seconds, through humidity, wind shifts, heat distortion from city streets and concrete. Every fraction of a millisecond, the bullet obeyed the math that lived in Jessica's mind. Then, impact, a sudden shift in the figure's posture, a collapse, no dramatic spray, no scream, just a body crumpling in silence. Like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence the world had been holding its breath for. Target neutralized, came the voice in her earpiece. Repeat. Threat eliminated. All federal buildings secure. Jessica remained still, breathing. Listening to the silence that followed, she didn't smile. She didn't cry. She didn't celebrate, because this wasn't victory. It was duty. Colonel Steele approached slowly from behind, his steps heavy, reluctant. That was... He didn't finish the sentence. She turned her head, still prone. Her voice was soft. You thought I didn't belong. I did. You were wrong. A pause. I was. For a long moment, nothing else was said. Because what could be? No apology could undo the way she'd been doubted. No compliment could touch what she had just done. So she stood, not in triumph, but in stillness, and walked off the line. Inside the command center, the weight of her shot began to ripple. Analysts reviewed the footage. Ballistics experts traced the round's flight. Officers stared at monitors replaying the moment history changed. But Jessica? She just drank water, quietly, alone. She knew something the rest were only starting to realize. Sometimes greatness doesn't roar. It breathes, it calculates, and then it acts. The city was safe, the sniper was down, and Jessica Martinez, once dismissed, once doubted, once invisible, had done what no one else could. But she didn't need their headlines, or their praise, or their sudden respect, because her grandfather had told her the truth long ago. Dignity doesn't speak. It simply aims, and then it hits the target others said was impossible. And today, it had. What do you do after you make the impossible shot? You breathe, you stand, and then the weight hits you. Jessica Martinez walked down the corridor of the Federal Building's command center with her rifle slung low across her back, boots scuffing against polished concrete that now felt strangely hollow beneath her. She wasn't thinking about glory or records or headlines. She was thinking about the silence after the shot. Not the kind of silence that falls over a room, the kind that falls over your soul. The mission was over, the crisis averted. Federal buildings still stood, but as she passed rows of officers staring at screens, whispering into radios, reading the after-action reports she had just rewritten with a single bullet, Jessica felt something strange, not triumph, something closer to grief. Because while others talked about the physics, the trajectory, the perfect shot, she knew what it had cost to stay that calm, to carry that much weight, to pull that trigger, and know that someone on the other end would never breathe again, even if they deserved it. She stepped into the debriefing room and paused. Colonel Steele stood there, stiff as ever, arms folded. But his eyes didn't carry the same fire. Not anymore. Something had cracked. Maybe it was humility. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was something else he didn't know how to name. Sit, he said quietly. She did. For a long time, there was only the hum of the lights above them. I reviewed your diagnostics, he finally said, placing a tablet on the table. We logged every variable, wind, temperature, angle. You made 5 micro-corrections mid-breath without mechanical assistance. Jessica said nothing. You know what that means, Martinez? She tilted her head slightly. I did the math right. No, he said, jaw tight. You did the impossible. She met his gaze. It shouldn't have taken that to prove I belonged here. The words didn't sting. They just landed. Honest and even? No, he admitted. It shouldn't have. And for the first time, Colonel Marcus Steele, the man who had spent years defying what excellence looked like, realized that maybe excellence wasn't a look at all. Maybe it was. A choice, repeated, refined, relentless, made by people no one expected. Jessica stood. Do I need to stay for further questions? He shook his head. No, Martinez. I think the rest of us have the questions now. As she walked out of the room, past walls lined with portraits of sharpshooters, all men, all cut from the same cloth, a quiet fire lit in her chest. They'd have to make room on that wall now, not for a face that fit their mold, but for the woman who shattered it. Outside, the sun hung low in the afternoon sky, gold and blinding. A military vehicle waited to transport her back to the range facility. But before stepping in, she turned toward the Capitol dome in the distance. Still standing, because of her, she thought of her grandfather then, of his old hands placing that first rifle in hers, of his voice whispering in Spanish. Don't let them tell you what you are. Let your aim speak louder. And it had, her come. Unit crackled. General Hawkins' voice came through, measured, composed. Martinez, after action command will debrief with you at 0600 tomorrow. Take the night. You've earned it. She keyed the mic. Copy that. But sleep wasn't coming. Back at the training facility, the other candidates greeted her with a silence more profound than applause. A few nodded. One clapped quietly, almost like he was unsure if he had the right to. She didn't need their validation. What she needed now was to breathe again. So she went where she always went when the world got heavy. Range 7. The long-distance course stretched like a scar through the forest. Empty now under the waning light, Jessica lay prone again, her M24 nestled in her arms. Not to fire, but to remember, to feel. Her finger rested on the trigger, not pressing, just touching, because for the first time, the girl who had always been preparing didn't need to prove anything, not to the colonel, not to the other trainees, not even to herself. The shot had spoken, and now the silence could return. But somewhere in the darkness of her memory, she knew this wasn't the end. The capital had been saved, yes, but so many cities, so many systems, still needed shots like that, not just from rifles, but from minds like hers, precise, measured, and entirely underestimated, because what she'd done today wasn't just about marksmanship. It was about redefinition, the kind of redefinition that comes quietly, on soft boots, through steel nerves, with a single breath, and leaves a mark that echoes for generations. What happens when they stop doubting you and start depending on you? The morning after the shot, the sun hadn't yet risen, but Jessica Martinez was already awake. She didn't sleep, not really. Just rested her body and let her mind drift through the previous 24 hours like a silent sniper through brush. Slow, deliberate, alert. Her hand still remembered the weight of the rifle. Her cheek remembered the cold steel. Her shoulder still carried the subtle imprint of recoil. But what stayed with her most was the silence that followed the shot. The kind of silence you feel more than hear. A silence full of consequence, of lives unended, and assumptions undone. At 0600 sharp, she walked back into the command center, this time not as a trainee, not even as a candidate, but as the operator whose single round had stopped a national tragedy. The room didn't erupt. There were no salutes, no spontaneous applause, just stillness, and eyes that no longer looked past her, but to her. General Patricia Hawkins stood at the far end of the operations table, already reviewing satellite footage from the incident. She didn't look up when Jessica entered. She didn't need to. "Sit down, Sergeant Martinez," Hawkins said. Her tone was firm, but something in it had changed. A layer of respect had replaced the cautious curiosity from before. "Let's talk about what comes next." Jessica didn't ask, "What do you mean?" because she already knew. She'd done something extraordinary, and extraordinary came with consequences. "You're being recommended for assignment to the Omega Task Unit," Hawkins said. "If you accept, you'll be part of a classified long-range intervention team. Global deployment, black-level secrecy, eyes only." Jessica sat in silence. "You wouldn't wear rank," Hawkins continued. "You'd wear silence. You'd move where need meets impossibility. No credit, no records, just results. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. It felt like a corridor opening, a narrow one, a long one. "You want me to become a ghost," Jessica said quietly. Hawkins met her eyes. "You already are. The question is, do you want to haunt the world's worst nightmares? Or just prove a point to a training center that now worships the ground you walk on?" The words weren't cruel, just honest. Jessica looked down at her hands, the same hands that had once shaken in her grandfather's backyard as she missed target after target, the same hands that had steadied over years of relentless practice, the same hands that, yesterday, had written a bullet into history. "I didn't come here to be seen," she said, her voice even. "I came to serve." "Then say yes," Hawkins replied. "Because the world you just saved?" "That wasn't a one-time thing," Jessica nodded. "Then I'll serve, wherever I'm needed." As the meeting concluded, she stepped outside into the early morning air. The training facility was coming to life, recruits jogging in formation, instructors barking commands, rifles clacking as they were loaded and unloaded. But for Jessica, that world felt smaller now, not irrelevant, just changed. She walked past the long row of lockers and prep stations where only 2 days ago she'd been dismissed as unremarkable. Now, every head turned, not out of admiration, but recalibration. They were redoing the math, but Jessica wasn't interested in their revision. She was already moving on in the mess hall. One of the other trainees, the tall one from Georgia, who used to joke too loudly, stepped into her path. He looked sheepish. Hands in pockets. "Hey," he said. "You. About before. I didn't know you had it in you." She looked at him for a long moment, then offered a small smile. "You didn't need to." And she walked past. She didn't carry grudges. She carried clarity. In the barracks that night, Jessica packed the light. She wouldn't be returning. Her deployment to Omega Unit would begin at dawn. One rifle, one pack, one sealed folder containing coordinates of her next location. No fanfare, no ceremony, only the quiet machinery of a nation readjusting its own expectations. Before leaving, she visited Range 7 one last time. The same shooting platform where she had first been treated like a misfit, where Steele had hovered behind her, watching for flaws, ready to pounce. Now it was empty. Only the wind remained, and memory. She knelt, pressed her palm flat to the surface, and closed her eyes. Some part of her wanted to leave a mark, initials carved in the metal, a note hidden beneath the frame, but she didn't. Because she wasn't the kind to leave traces. She was the kind to leave standards, and then surpass them. As she stood and turned to go, she caught sight of Colonel Steele, watching from the shadows near the equipment lockers. His posture wasn't rigid like before. He looked older, smaller. "I thought you'd already left," he said. "I'm leaving now." He nodded. "You changed the way I look at talent." She studied him. "I didn't come to teach you." "No," he agreed. "But you did." A long silence stretched between them. "Wherever you're going," he said, "you'll be the best." Jessica didn't smile, didn't thank him. She just looked at him, steady and still. "I was already the best," she said softly. "You just didn't see it." Then she walked into the night. No applause, no medals. Just the sound of gravel beneath her boots, and somewhere in the distance, a world waiting for another shot only she could make. How do you carry the weight of a nation and still walk alone? Jessica Martinez didn't board a plane. She didn't file into a terminal or salute a departure crew. She slipped into the world the way all ghosts do. Quietly, 3 hours after accepting her assignment to Omega Unit. She was on the move, a nondescript black SUV, windows tinted, license plates untraceable, carried her down a back road that cut through mist-soaked hills. The man driving didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. His job wasn't to talk. Was to disappear. The file in her lap bore no insignia, no names. Just a barcode and one line of text. Objective. Confirmed Tier 1 threat. Location Northern Range, Ural Sector, range 19 miles. Target mobile. Probability of civilian casualty 74%. She read the file once, then again, then folded it shut and stared out the window. She didn't ask why they had picked her. She knew, because once you make the impossible shot, the world stops questioning what you can do and starts wondering how often it can ask you to do it again. By the time she reached the airstrip, her gear had already been prepped. Custom-modified rifle, laser-calibrated optics, ammunition loaded by hand. Every piece of equipment was pristine, precise, lethal. But that wasn't what steadied her. What steadied her were the words her grandfather had whispered long ago. A weapon is only as quiet as the hands that hold it. She was silenced now, and the world had worked for her. The aircraft that lifted her out of U.S. airspace had no markings. No cabin lights, no safety briefing. Just a pilot, a shadowy tech specialist, and a SATCOM operator who watched her like someone seeing myth in the flesh. They didn't talk, but as the hours passed, Jessica felt the pull again. That's strange. Gravity of responsibility. Stronger than pride. Deeper than fear. It wasn't excitement. It was duty in its purest form. The kind that doesn't ask for thanks, only results. When she landed, the cold hit her like a wall. The Urals in late autumn were brutal, wind-sharp. As razors, snow already icing the treetops, she adjusted her pack, pulled the hood of her thermal cloak up, and moved wordlessly through the forest toward the staging coordinates. Her new command post was a cave system, ancient, hidden, half-forgotten by history. Inside, the mission team briefed her in whispers over glowing monitors. "This target doesn't move like the last one," a voice said. "It relocates every 6 minutes. Precision timing will be critical." Jessica nodded. "Backstop is minimal. Civilians in range if the shot drifts." She nodded again. "Window of opportunity, 116 seconds." Another nod. She didn't ask why this man needed to be eliminated. That wasn't her role. She was the scalpel, not the diagnosis. And if she missed? There was no backup shooter this time. She was the last layer, the moment before consequence. At 0343, she lay prone on a snowy ridge, elevation 1,200 meters, body half covered in pine needles. Her thermal gear blended perfectly with the earth, her rifle already sighted in. The wind was erratic, movement below. A caravan of vehicles, through her scope. She watched a figure step from the lead transport. He moved with the relaxed confidence of someone who believed they were untraceable, unreachable. She adjusted her aim. The spotter beside her murmured, "Confirm identity?" Jessica zoomed in. Face, scar above the right eyebrow. Left shoulder tilt from an old injury. Confirmed. Timer started. She slowed her breathing, let her heartbeat drop. 60, 58, 54. At 42, she was ready. The wind shifted, no panic. No hesitation. Just math. She dialed in compensation, adjusted for temperature drop. Then the target moved again, stepped into the exact kill zone predicted 12 hours prior, and just like before. The squeeze, the crack, the silence, even before the coms confirmed the hit. She knew, center mass, precise, clean. She stayed down another 90 seconds. Standard procedure, just in case. But the world below didn't fight back. The mission was complete. Back. At the cave, no one cheered. No one clapped her on the shoulder. They just handed her a hot drink, took her rifle, and loaded the data into their encrypted servers. "What happens now?" she asked. "You rest," the tech replied, "until we need you again." The words didn't carry comfort or warmth, just inevitability, because that was the truth of the life she had chosen or had been chosen for. She wasn't a soldier anymore. She was a tool sharpened to a whisper, a weapon honed for moments no one else could survive, a guardian the world only remembered when it teetered on the edge of collapse. She drank the coffee in silence. The heat burned her tongue. She didn't flinch, because this wasn't the end of a journey. It was the continuation of a role no one ever saw. Until it was too late to matter. She was the line between breath and no breath. The last flicker of light before a nation's lights went out. And she would hold that line again and again and again. Not because she was asked, but because she could. What does it mean to live a life made of moments no one sees? Jessica Martinez sat alone in a dimly lit safe house outside Warsaw. The room was spare. Concrete walls, no windows, a cot, a radio, and a steel case that never left her side. Her rifle, cleaned, calibrated, silent, like her. It had been 3 days since the Ural shot, and she was already being briefed for the next, in the shadows. She had become something the military rarely produced and even more rarely understood, a long-range ghost, not assigned to a base or battalion, but deployed wherever precision and silence were the only solutions. Her name no longer appeared on rosters. Her file was classified beyond top secret. Even the bullets she used were custom-made and never logged in official inventories. She was a shadow's edge, and she walked alone. The door buzzed. A man in civilian clothes stepped in. Olive skin, worn hands, eyes that didn't blink enough. Intelligence handler. He said only one sentence. "Paris. Tomorrow, no miss." then handed her a folder. She opened it. The target, a diplomat turned double agent wanted in 3 countries, scheduled to address a crowd at a cultural summit near the Seine. Security was airtight, police everywhere, no clear access, no backstop, no margin. She scanned the blueprints. One rooftop, exactly 20 miles away, a shot across open air, wind coming off the river, tall glass buildings creating unpredictable shifts in airflow. She closed the folder. Is he guilty? The man's jaw flexed. If he wasn't, they wouldn't have called you. He left, and once again, she was alone with her questions. This was the part no one understood. The solitude after the shot. Not the silence of concealment, but the internal silence, the kind that echoes, that forces you to face the moral calculus most people run from. Jessica had learned not to fear the shot, but she feared forgetting what the shot meant. That night, she wrote a name on a scrap of paper. The man she was meant to kill. She folded it 3 times, tucked it beneath her rifle case, and whispered the name aloud, not out of ritual, but out of accountability, because every shot taken in silence still echoes somewhere. The next morning, the Paris sky was overcast, perfect for optics, unpredictable. For wind, she took position in an abandoned bell tower, 6 stories high, across the river from the opera house where the speech would be held. Inside her scope, she saw people arrive, bodyguards, politicians, civilians, and then the target. He stepped onto the balcony, smiled for the cameras, waved like a man with nothing to hide. Jessica didn't feel hate, only certainty. She studied the flags, measured drift in the heat waves from air vents, waited for the slight dip in wind speed she had predicted would arrive at 11:04 a.m. Right on time. She exhaled. The world shrank. 1 breath, 1 life, 1 consequence. The shot cracked like thunder through the city, too fast for most to react, too precise for anyone to trace. The man collapsed behind the podium before his bodyguards realized what had happened. Panic rippled through the crowd, but Jessica was already gone. By the time sirens began to scream, her gear had been stashed, her case closed, her presence erased. She left no footprint, no trace, only truth. And even that would be classified. Back at the extraction point, she sat in the rear of a delivery van as it rolled through winding Parisian streets. A young handler, barely 25, sat across from her, wide-eyed, curious. "Do you ever think about what you just did?" he asked, nervously. Jessica looked at him. "I think about it before," she said. "So I don't have to after." He nodded slowly, then asked, "What's it like, being you?" She turned her gaze to the moving city beyond the van's window. "It's like being a breath," she said softly. "You're only noticed when you're missing." And he didn't speak again, because what could he say? She was no longer a soldier in the traditional sense. She was an instrument, a principle, a quiet correction applied to loud failures. But inside, she still carried the same fire her grandfather had lit all those years ago, the one that said, "Don't. Shoot for glory. Shoot for meaning." She hadn't forgotten, and she wouldn't. Not even after the next target, or the one after that, because Jessica Martinez didn't take shots for vengeance. She took them to protect the world that never saw her coming, and never would. What happens when even the silence begins to feel heavy? Jessica Martinez sat at a train station in southern Italy, her back to a stone wall, a duffel bag resting by her feet. The world bustled around her. Families laughing, vendors yelling. In Italian, the hum of trains arriving and departing. No one recognized her. No one knew she had ended a global standoff just 48 hours earlier with a single suppressed round fired from 2,100 meters into the passenger window of a moving convoy. And yet, here she was, eating a piece of dry bread, watching pigeons. She had saved lives again. But there were no medals, no parades, just a text message sent to a secure phone. "Well done. Await further tasking." That was the new rhythm of her life. A quiet hand over the chaos, then stillness, then more waiting. But the waiting, it wasn't rest, it was wait. Each mission added to the silence that followed. Each precise shot left behind a deeper stillness that even sleep couldn't touch. You don't carry a rifle for this long without it changing how your heart beats. Jessica closed her eyes and leaned back against the wall. Just for a moment, and in that moment, she remembered the rooftop in Virginia, the training range where no one had believed in her, where he hadn't believed in her, Colonel Marcus Steele, and now, all these months later, the one voice that had tried to silence her had become strangely quiet, because after the shot that saved the Capitol, he never spoke to her again until today her secure line buzzed. The ID read, "Steele." She hesitated, then answered. His voice was older somehow, less iron, more gravel. "Martinez, sir. I'm not calling to debrief. This isn't official." She didn't reply. "I heard about Paris and Sicily and Istanbul." Still, she said nothing. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "I owe you a reckoning." She opened her eyes. The sun cut across the cobblestones. "I don't need apologies, Colonel. I know, but maybe I do." He paused, then added, quieter, "You changed everything here. The way we test, the way we evaluate. We've rewritten the entire protocol." Jessica's grip on the phone tightened. "That's not why I did it," she said. "I know," he said, "but it matters then." After a beat, "Why are you still doing it?" That question, hit harder than the rest, because she didn't know anymore. At first, it had been duty, precision, responsibility. But now it felt like identity. She wasn't Jessica anymore. Not to the world, not even to herself. She was the one who made impossible shots. So what did she become if she ever said no? The call ended. She didn't remember hanging up. She just stared at her hands. The same hands that had held death in them more times than she could count. And had never shaken until now a child ran past, laughed, chased pigeons, and Jessica. She felt something shift. For a moment, she wanted to put the rifle down, not because she couldn't carry it anymore, but because she wondered what her life could be without it. Could she go back? Could she be anything else? She didn't know, but the doubt had never been louder, and as the train pulled in, its brakes hissing, the question stayed with her. If I stop being the one who makes the impossible shot, will I still be enough? She picked up her bag and stepped onto the train. The mission hadn't come yet, but when it did, she knew she'd say yes again, because even if she was breaking under the silence, there were still people out there who slept safely because they didn't know her name. And that, for now, was reason enough. When do you know it's time to let go? Jessica Martinez stood on the roof of a government compound in northern Alaska, surrounded by silence so thick it felt sacred. The cold pressed against her skin like truth, unignorable, honest. The sky above her was a deep bruised violet, the kind that comes just before dawn, just before decisions are made that cannot be undone. This was her last shot, not because she couldn't do it again, but because something inside her had shifted. The mission briefing was simple. Rogue ex-Special Forces operative, holding hostages in a decommissioned Arctic research station. No way in, no way to negotiate. The man had already killed 2 negotiators. A thermal scope confirmed his location. She was 193 miles out, elevation adjusted, wind brutal, and she could make the shot. She knew that the moment she saw the terrain, but this time, her hands hovered over the rifle longer than they should have. It wasn't fear, it wasn't doubt. It was tiredness, not in her body, but in her soul. Too many silent victories. Too many names never spoken. Too many moments where she exhaled and changed the course of a nation, only to disappear again before the echo faded. Her spotter, a young woman with sharp eyes and trembling fingers, lay beside her. "I've read your file." The spotter whispered, "I trained because of you." Jessica didn't reply. The girl pressed on, voice low, reverent. "They say no one can do what you do." Jessica blinked once. "They're wrong." The girl frowned. "But you've never missed. That's not the same as being whole." A gust of wind swept across the snowdrift, stinging her cheeks, but Jessica didn't flinch. Her body still knew what to do. Her mind still calculated faster than the sensors. But her heart fell heavy, and yet she chambered the round, slid into prone position. Breathed in, through her scope, she saw the man pacing, weapon slung, unaware of the crosshairs whispering over his chest. Behind him, a flicker of movement, a child, small, barefoot, a hostage. Jessica adjusted half a degree. The wind calmed, and again, everything narrowed to a breath, then crack. The sound split the air like judgment, and once again, it was perfect. The man dropped. The hostage scrambled free, and the radio confirmed what she already knew. Target neutralized. Hostage is safe. No casualties. Jessica exhaled slowly, lowered her weapon, and for the first time in years, let herself feel something close to sadness. Not for the man she'd killed, but for the years she'd spent carrying this burden so the world didn't have to. Beside her, the spotter beamed. That was incredible, but Jessica didn't smile. She just looked at the young woman and said, gently, "You'll take my place soon." The girl blinked. "Are you leaving?" Jessica nodded once. "I've done what I came to do." She stood, slinging her rifle over her back, not with pride, but with reverence. She had never chased medals, never wanted headlines. She had only wanted to serve, and she had. Over and over and over, until the world changed. Not because it saw her, but because it never had to. As the transport helicopter arrived to exfil the team, Jessica climbed aboard, but didn't look back at the ridge. She had seen enough. She sat quietly in the back, wind tugging at her jacket, fingers curled loosely around her rifle strap, and in that moment, for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond the scope. Not because the world no longer needed her, but because now it had others, because sometimes the greatest service is knowing when to step away, when to pass the torch, when to let go. Jessica Martinez disappeared from the world the same way she'd entered it, quietly, without ceremony. No one knew her name, but nations slept safer because she had walked among them. And when history looks back, it may never know her face, her voice, or her story. But in a quiet room somewhere, on a map long forgotten, there will be a bullet hole no one can explain. A perfect shot at an impossible distance, made by someone they called just a mechanic, just a woman, just lucky. But she knew the truth, and so did we, because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.